Thank you.
Yesterday, I heard you use the phrase, the politics of painful choices, when you were talking about governing today in this current fiscally constrained environment. And that phrase really stuck with me. And I was wondering, what does that actually look like in practice? When you're sitting around the cabinet table making budget decisions, what are those conversations like?
The politics of painful choices is essentially the kind of policies you make within the context of very constrained physical situation and also an unpredictable development environment. Over the last couple of years, we have seen a lot of uncertainty. Today, we have the debt crisis, where we take 42% of our revenue to service debt. And then you have international development window closing down. Last year, we were in Syria, where the message was clear that most developing countries should now mobilize domestic resources to finance their development. And then you also have climate risk. And then within that context, you have unpredictable events like the Ukrainian crisis and then the Middle East crisis. We are in domestic commodities like electricity, fuel, rice, and essential commodities, that price go up. So what you do as a government, when you get limited revenue now, and you spend 42% of that revenue to service debt, the remaining money that is there is what you are going to redistribute across government priorities. So then what do? You are left with very painful choices to make. The painful choices is more or less the politics of trade-off. What do you delay now? Can you delay building a school? Can you delay building a hospital? In a country like Sierra Leone, every day 720 kids are born. And these 720 kids, they translate into 14 classrooms. So it means every day you have to think about building 14 classrooms. You have to think about recruiting additional teachers for these kids. You have to think about paying healthcare workers to go. So which means at the end of the day, but that is what I call the politics of painful choices. You are left as a government to trade off what are priorities that we can do now, what we can delay. So in essence, the politics of painful choices means you focus on key priorities to keep you above water, and then you delay development priorities, more long-term development priorities. Like you cannot have limited resources. You begin to think whether I want to spend it on protecting mangroves or paying school teachers, or you want to build new roads. So long-term development projects are stalled to attend to the realities of the day. These are the priorities around essentially education, health, and more importantly, climate change in certain key areas wherein vulnerabilities are expanding. So the politics of painful choices is how a government, small economies like Sierra Leone, survive and govern in a context of tight fiscal space, reduce development aid, and an unpredictable multilateral system and international system, and shocks that are very, very difficult to absorb as the one we are facing today as a result of the Hormuz crisis.
Indeed sounds impossible in many situations. I'm wondering, what are the sort of misconceptions that development partners or donors might have about actually what it means to govern in this sort of situation with such limited fiscal space? Is there something that you find that people sometimes misunderstand about how it works?
Yeah, well, yes. Sometime couple of weeks ago, I participated in the World Bank Fragility Conference, and I told them what is it that we have to learn. We have to learn that today unpredictability itself is a vehicle of fragility. Because if you take a country like Sierra Leone, over the years we have made immense macroeconomic gains. We took over power in 2018, and within 2018 we said we are going to attack major social issues. We focus on maternal and infant health. We increased the national budget from 6% to 11.2% in health. And then we were able to reduce maternal mortality between 2018 and 2023 by 79%. We were able to reduce infant mortality. And then we took education. We took 22% of our budget to spend it on education because we wanted to give access to kids across the country to go to school. So we pronounce a free quality education. And then to encourage girls to go to school, we are able to increase girls' enrollment in school. Today, you have more girls in secondary school than any other time since independence. Today, you have more girls in university studying sciences, engineering, because any girl who goes to study STEM courses is free education. We made all of this investment. We have made gains also in reducing inflation. Inflation was at 48%. We reduced it to a single digit. We stabilized the currency. We are able to make sure at the end of the day commodity prices are stable. But all of these gains do not only depend on domestic governance choices. They depend on a stable global commodity prices. Because if there is a shock in the Middle East, if there is a shock, if there is a crisis in Ukraine, if this crisis impact global transport costs, freight costs, the cost of essential commodities, and the cost of fuel that translate automatically into people's life, then at the end of the day, unpredictability of this nature, it itself a vehicle of fragility. It drives fragility. That is what international community needs to learn. And sometimes also what they need to learn is that the instruments that are available to support countries going through these kinds of fragility, to support countries going through this kind of shocks, are usually instruments that are not adaptable to the reality. Because the international community, they finance us based on what they call a review cycle. If every year they say we are planning to do we have provided a country assistance program, and then they walk around the country assistance program and they say, okay, we give $600 million, for example, in the World Bank for the year. This kind of shocks that has tendency to reverse all the gains we have made over the years. This needs flexible instrument to support countries to consolidate the gains they have made, instead of just focusing on the review cycle. Secondly, sometimes the instruments are also very rigid and slow. That is the same thing I wanted to share with our partners yesterday, to compare what is happening in the Omos to what is happening in the Sahel. I worked for a couple of years in the United Nations in the Sahel as the Sahel advisor to the special representative of the Secretary General. Is that every time capital is not lacking, people, institutions are ready to deploy. But because institutions operate with different mandates and from different windows, mediating and negotiating how they could support becomes a challenge. So usually what the international community needs to learn is that sometimes these countries that have made immense gains in the social sector, immense gain in creating minimum macroeconomic stability, are not strong enough to be able to absorb certain shocks. So what instruments are available to do that? And today what we learned from the Middle East crisis is that already most African countries today capacity, to be able to absorb shocks of this nature.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, I know you have described it a bit, but I know also I think it was in your conversation yesterday that you called for a shock absorption facility, right? Could you tell me a little bit more about how that would differ from the types of facilities that are already in place? What would you like it to look like?
Well, this shock absorption capacity, it will differ in the sense that, one, it is not a facility that is subjected to annual review. This is not a facility. This is a facility that comes, and then it is a facility that has its own triggers. Like you say, okay, I'm going to give you a facility so that you are not able to reduce the gains you have made in education, in health. So this is a facility. This is a facility I give you so that you can continue to keep the gains you have made because you are going through shocks. And secondly, this is a facility that is flexible. It is a facility to allow you to be able to absorb the shock. I give you a critical example. Now, when I talk about the politics of painful choices, if now the almost crisis, like I just said yesterday, and that when you have an increase in fuel from $70 to $120, automatically our fuel importation invoice rises between $140 to $160 million. That is 2% of our GDP. And that is definitely going to be translated. If you take all of that increase and then translate it directly into the pump price, it is going to increase fuel cost, by extension, transportation cost, by extension, local domestic food prices will go up. So what does government do? Government engages in a kind of a politics of redistribution. What we earn, we redistribute it as in a form of subsidy for those things. So that subsidy envelope, like if, for example, I decide to take $10 million or $20 million, I say, okay, instead of the pump price goes to $1.50, I will just increase the pump price by $1.20. The 30 cent is, if the 30 cent is the tax that government is supposed to get, I sacrifice that tax. So, but when you have an absorption facility, then the absorption facility allows you that $30 that you are going to trade off. You can then use that $30 for other essential social interventions, like paying healthcare workers, paying teachers, so that at the same time, you don't transfer the stress of fuel pump price increase to people, and then you don't lose the money that you also need to and then it can be triggers. You can design the triggers. You can be able to say, this money we are giving you can only be spent on education, on health, or to reduce the pump price. That is one key definition of how that facility is going to be defined. It could also be a pre-capitalized facility, a facility that already is there. It is there. They are only there. They are only used for this kind of shock, so that at least the gains we have invested in over the years, the gains we have made over the years in a country like small economies like Sierra Leone, is not swiped up over the. So it allows us to absorb the shock. That short-term facility allows us to stabilize the shock, and at the same time, we continue to spend on social sectors that are very, very important, for the development of the country. These are not facilities that are going to be spent on building roads. These are not facilities that are going to be spent on building bridges or building schools or building hospitals. These are facilities that are going to allow government to be able to continue to spend on social sectors, keep hospitals working, keep schools working, while at the same time reduce the stress of the shock in transferring it 100% to the population. This is it is like what you have for the environment. It is called the Global Shield. It's a facility that is given to countries that suffer extreme climate problems. We are in the short term that comes in to support them, essentially.
We're here at a conference about sustainability, and just as a follow-up to what you were mentioning about the politics of painful choices, I'm curious about how issues like sustainability, environment, climate shake out for you in government, because I could imagine, pressure from citizenry and indeed yourself, right, to address the most immediate life-saving questions and problems. So how do you balance sustainability? How do you think about sustainability when you're in such a constrained fiscal space?
Well, essentially, that is at the heart of what I call the politics of painful choices, and that you operate within very difficult environment. Like in my opening yesterday, I said, in the past three decades, African countries like Sierra Leone have been operating within a very stable international development space, meaning over the years we have seen increased development assistance, and then we have seen expanding globalization. We have seen a predictable, relatively stable multilateral environment. And then African countries are working very hard to be integrated into global market. But that assumptions does not seem to hold now, or is under threat. Today, more and more, we are seeing geopolitical interest and competition, determine investment flows, also determine how global development policies are shaped. There's a reduction in development assistance. We are servicing debt. I just told you about 42% of our national domestic revenue. So in this kind of space where you are totally constrained and you have to make trade-offs, then the whole question of how are you going to spend the limited money you have becomes very, very paramount. So in that kind of context, you have to ask yourself, is sustainability, is climate action a priority now for me? Do I want to not pay teachers? Do I not want to pay nurses? Do I want students and citizens to go to the street and demonstrate that things are difficult? Or I want to focus on long-term climate actions, on sustainability issues. So these are the painful choices you have to make as a government. And then you are not that you don't care about the security of the environment, not that you don't care about the urgency of sustainable issues, but that the priority at hand, how does that priority at hand relate to the limited resources you have? In as much as making certain gains, we are making investment in the area of food and access to electricity. We are moving towards renewable electricity. Like somebody said in the opening yesterday, in the last couple of years, 60% of the electricity expansion that we see in most of the world is towards renewable energy. In Sierra Leone, we are doing the same. Like today, in Sierra Leone, we have decided that the over 1,000 health facilities that we have across the country, we are going to solarize them. Already, we have started solarizing them. We have solarized 36 major health facilities in the country. So now we are working on the others. We have introduced smart agriculture. We have made sure that we are moving towards renewable. Today, a couple of years ago, in 2018, our energy access was at 16%. In the last couple of years, we have increased that to 34%. We have made massive investment in generation and transmission. We've got investment from the Americans, $480 million grant, MCC grant, that we are investing in building new transmission and distribution lines. We are building also power plants that are going to use LNG. We are building solar plants. So by 2030, energy access in Sierra Leone will be increased to 78%. As we are going right now, the kind of investment that we are making. So we have been making a lot of effort in renewable, in transitioning, and making sure that health facilities and smart agriculture invest in renewable. We are also supporting communities and local communities to be able to reduce deforestation. We are doing all of that. But all of this kind of intervention should not be subjected to external shock, because what you spend on this kind of intervention are relatively, when all things are equal, on priority sectors like health, like education. Like when things are stable in those priority sections, that it allows you to make investment into resilience. For us, resilience is both taking care of short-term priorities while investing also in the long term. It is not the two-way approach. But when you are confronted with making very painful choices, the long-term development, like building road to create access to market, supporting rural women to be able to manage climate change, and also managing the erosion of mangroves, becomes a long-term priority, because you focus on the daily subsistence of people, making sure that essential commodities are not increased, essential commodities stay stable, so that people with very limited resources can be able to buy food, and then you are able to reduce what we call out-of-pocket expenditure on health, because you have to also subsidize medicines. You have to also make sure you pay for hospitals to go, so that people continue to spend less on those things. So for us, managing and focusing on sustainability as a priority means that we have to operate in a stable global commodity price that will not reverse the gain. It will reduce the chances of making very painful choices. But when you have global shock, we moved out of COVID. When COVID came, by the time we were trying to develop a post-COVID recovery plan, Ukrainian crisis came with a new, and now that you've made some gains over the last couple of years, the Hormuz crisis came. How simple trade route disruptions of trade route can cause lasting effect on the other part of the Atlantic. What becomes a security problem in the Middle East is now a human development problem in countries like Sierra Leone. So in that kind of context, we are faced with the challenging task of absorbing the shock. And in absorbing the shock, what are the immediate priorities you have to spend the limited resources that you have? One, you have to redistribute part of it to subsidize major commodity price. And second, you have to make a choice which particular development project you have to engage in. So in that kind of context, it's like the relationship between security and development. I tell people in the Sahelian countries, development today is not a priority because they spend most of their budget on security. When you are confronted with a security situation, and security is not just about arms, security is about supporting communities to be able to cope with the vulnerabilities they are experiencing on a daily basis. Security is about keeping the prices of essential commodities, very stable. Security is about making sure that young people go to school and they have jobs to sustain themselves and their family. Security is about supporting communities to be able to cope with climate vulnerabilities. So these are the dimensions that these are the trade-offs that we make. So while we acknowledge sustainability as a key priority, we also, at the same time, are faced with realities that reduces our capacity to make very fine trade-offs, wherein sustainability is placed at the center of our politics in a very unpredictable environment. Is about survival. It's about maintaining the gains. It's about building on the gains you have already made in the social sector, in education, in health, and in commodity prices.
And I wanted to ask you about, you've been mentioning the staggering amount that Sierra Leone has to pay to service its debt, right? Which is contributing, of course, to this constrained fiscal space. I was wondering, it seems like many countries, especially in Africa, are really grappling with this question of servicing debt. Does this just need to be the main conversation at every conference? It seems like everything else is unlocked if we can solve this one problem, debt servicing. Like, are we paying enough attention to try and resolve this? Should this be front and center at every conference? What are the kinds of conversations on debt and debt servicing that you wish were happening more?
Well, you see, the debt servicing is not only external debt, it's also domestic debt. So even if you bring the conversations to international institutions or lending institutions, maybe if they decide to focus on their own debt, you still have domestic debt. So in combination, a country like Sierra Leone, we spend 42%, like I said, of our domestic revenue to service both domestic and international debt. And that in itself, 42%, is a lot. The UNDP Director General was talking yesterday about more than 10%. I reminded him, it's not 10%. I don't know which countries' indicators you are using, but it's far above that in sub-Saharan Africa, in most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you take 42%, you can imagine what that 42% will do if you are spending it on other essential sectors. It shows the tight fiscal constraint. And most of these debts, they come from essentially high energy invoices, for a country. And then at the same time, the kind of transition countries are making. For example, in a country like Sierra Leone, we realize that government footprint in delivering services has to reduce dramatically. So we are moving for the privatization of state-owned enterprises that allows those state-owned enterprises to function effectively and to be able to break even and even make profit, including in the energy space. We passed a law to allow private sector to intervene in production in generation, in transmission, distribution, and commercialization of electricity. So we allow government money that we spend to subsidize electricity, then we can spend it somewhere else. But today, the big question is, how do you support those countries? We normally get envelopes of support. A particular envelope of support will come from the IMF, from the World Bank. So we give you 20 million, 15 million, so that you can pay your electricity invoices. Just to reduce the debt. I believe one critical thing I usually tell international community people is, if you identify where government investment comes in, because debt servicing deprive government of involving in development projects. You are not able to build road to create market access. You are not able to build additional infrastructure that will become enabling vehicles to steer up macroeconomic development. So the money you spend on debt can then be able to allow you to do a development. You're able to build road, because it's only when you're able to build road, you're going to help the economy grow. To help the economy grow, you have to invest in productive sectors. But for now, in a context where you are servicing debt at that scale, your investment are just limited to the social sectors. And when you invest in the social sector, you don't grow the economy. You only grow the economy when you invest in the productive sector, and then you're able to build the infrastructure that will create jobs, and then that will create additional revenue for the state. So this debt servicing is an issue last year was largely debated in Sevilla. Today, most in Hamburg here is a buzzword. The opening statement yesterday, not all of these speakers made reference to debt, made reference to huge debt, and how this huge debt and how this unpredictability, like what is happening in the Omos, are driving our attention from sustainability issues to realities on a daily basis that small countries in the global south are really living. I believe the conversation is, how do you address that? Like I said yesterday, and then we have to invest. The international community will have to also invest in building what I call resilience infrastructure. What does that mean? It means you invest resources on food security, how to increase food access, and then at the same time, energy access. Because food and energy access is the structural backbone for countries to be able to